In the years 1877 and 1878, a warm patch of the Pacific Ocean helped kill more than 50 million people. The same kind of signal that preceded that catastrophe is forming again right now, and as of yesterday, the measurement scientists use to track it sits at plus 0.48 on the doorstep of El Niño. In the next 20 minutes, I'll show you what a super El Niño does to the planet, the food, the reefs, the record heat, and why the number forming today decides which future we get. A patch of ocean along the equator has been warming for 6 straight months, and as of yesterday, the numbers say it may be turning into one of the strongest El Niño events ever recorded. The single measurement scientists use to track this, called the Oceanic Niño Index, now sits at plus 0.48 degrees Celsius. That number is parked right on the doorstep of the plus 0.5 mark that officially defines El Niño conditions, close enough that by the time you finish watching, the line may already have been crossed. About a week ago, this channel covered the onset, the moment the Pacific started smashing heat records faster than the forecast models predicted. This is the part that comes after. The question now is not whether El Niño is arriving. It is. The question is how strong it gets, and what a strong one actually does to the planet. And for that, we have receipts. The reason this matters to you, no matter where you live, is that El Niño is not a local weather story. It is a planetary one. A single stretch of the equatorial Pacific warms up, the atmosphere reorganizes itself around that warmth, and the effects ripple outward into the weather of North America, South America, Australia, Asia, Africa, and Europe. The same event that drowns Peru can set Australia on fire. The same event that gives part of North America a mild winter can kill coral reefs on the other side of the world. That lopsided reach is exactly why a number most people will never see, measured in a part of the ocean most people will never visit, ends up touching almost everyone. To understand what comes next, you have to understand the machine that drives it. In a normal year, the trade winds blow steadily from east to west along the equator, pushing warm surface water toward Indonesia and the western Pacific. The piled up warm water is called the warm pool. On the other side of the ocean, off the coast of South America, that same wind pulls cold water up from far below the surface to replace what has been pushed away. So you end up with a warm western Pacific and a cool eastern Pacific, and the whole system stays balanced. El Niño begins when those trade winds slacken. Once they weaken, the warm pool starts sliding back east, spreading across the middle of the ocean. And here is the part that makes this so powerful, that spreading warm water weakens the winds even further, which lets even more warm water spread, which weakens the winds again. Scientists call this loop the Bjerknes feedback, and the important thing about it is that it feeds itself. Once it gets going, it does not need anything from the outside to keep it running. The ocean and the atmosphere lock into a self-reinforcing cycle, and that cycle is what we are watching strengthen right now. When that warm water shifts east, it drags the planet's rain belts, jet streams, and storm tracks along with it. The thunderstorms that normally sit over the western Pacific march eastward into the central Pacific, and that single change reroutes weather patterns across entire continents. This is the mechanism behind every El Niño headline you have ever seen. It is why the same event can mean flooding in one country and drought in another at the exact same time. The atmosphere is simply reorganizing around a new center of heat, and everything downstream gets rearranged. What has scientists paying close attention is not just that El Niño is forming, it is how fast it formed. 6 months ago, this same stretch of ocean was running cold in a La Niña state. Back in the October to December season of last year, the index was sitting at minus 0.55. Then it climbed, minus 0.37 over the winter, minus 0.14. Then it crossed zero and kept going, plus 0.13 and now plus 0.48, as of the latest reading. That is a swing of about 1 full point in roughly 6 months, and the sea surface temperature in the key monitoring region climbed about 2 degrees Celsius over that same window. Every single step pointed in the same direction, up. That speed is a warning sign in itself. Rapid jumps from La Niña straight into El Niño have, in the historical record, often come before some of the biggest events. The reason is that a fast transition means the ocean is loading energy quickly, like a spring being compressed in a hurry rather than slowly. And a quick swing gives everyone less time to prepare. Farmers planning their planting, fisheries bracing for collapse, governments trying to stockpile food. A slow build gives you lead time. This was not a slow build. It helps to picture what loading actually means down in the water. During the La Niña phase that just ended, the trade winds were strong, and they had been packing warm water into the western Pacific like sand piling up against a wall. That reservoir of heat does not disappear when the winds relax. It is still there, sitting just below the surface, waiting. When the winds finally let go, all of that stored warmth begins sliding back across the ocean toward the east, and the surface temperatures we measure are really just the top of a much larger pool of heat rising into view. So when the index jumps a full point in 6 months, what it is telling us is that an enormous amount of energy has been released from storage in a short window. That is why forecasters do not treat a fast onset as reassuring. The faster the loading, the more of that hidden heat is in play, and the higher the ceiling for how strong the event can ultimately become. The forecast models agree on where this is headed. The European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts and other major models project that the Central Pacific keeps warming through the back half of this year. Some model members push the anomaly toward +3 to +4 degrees Celsius. The odds of El Niño formally forming in the coming months are running at roughly 80 to 90%, and there's a real chance of reaching the very strong category by winter. So this is not a coin flip. The signal is loud, the models are lined up, and the only honest uncertainty left is the magnitude. You may have heard this event described as a Godzilla El Niño, and that word is doing real work, not just grabbing attention. Scientists sort these events into categories by strength. El Niño conditions start at +0.5. A strong El Niño is anything at or above +1.5. And a very strong event, the one people nickname Godzilla, is +2.0 or higher. That nickname was popularized by a NASA climatologist back during the last giant event, and it gets reserved for the rare cases when the ocean anomaly climbs into truly extreme territory. To give you a sense of scale, consider the benchmark events of the modern record. The El Niño of 1997 and 1998 peaked at around +2.4. The event of 2015 and 2016, the original Godzilla, peaked near +2.6. Those are the giants this one is being measured against. And current guidance suggests this event has a genuine path into that same range. That is the entire reason the historical comparisons matter, because if this climbs to +2.5, the relevant question is not what an average El Niño does. It is what the monsters did. There's one more factor that makes this event potentially worse than its raw number suggests, and it is a quiet but important one. Any El Niño in 2026 is stacking on top of a baseline that is already elevated, with the planet running roughly 1.3 to 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer than the pre-industrial era. That means the El Niño spike is riding on a higher floor. The same ocean anomaly that produced record heat in past events can now push the absolute temperature even higher simply because it starts from a warmer starting point. The spike is the same size, but it launches from higher up. Here is why this is not just a science story, and why the strongest events deserve genuine respect. Go back to the years 1877 and 1878. A super El Niño took hold, and the monsoon rains that hundreds of millions of people depended on simply failed across large parts of the world at once. In India, in China, and in Brazil, crops withered, harvests collapsed, and what followed was one of the deadliest disasters in human history. The death toll from the resulting famines is commonly cited at somewhere between 30 and 60 million people, frequently summarized as more than 50 million dead. That number is almost impossible to hold in your head, so sit with it for a moment. More than 50 million people killed in large part because a patch of the Pacific Ocean warmed up and rerouted the rains that fed 3 continents. That is the extreme tale of what this phenomenon can do. It is not a guarantee, and the modern world has food storage, transport networks, and forecasting that the 1870s did not. But the connection between the ocean and the dinner table is not a metaphor. It is a documented, repeatable pathway, and the strongest El Niño events are the ones that have walked all the way down it. The reason this history belongs in a conversation about today is simple. The signal forming in the Pacific right now is the same kind of signal that preceded that catastrophe. Not identical, and not certain to be as severe, but the same family of event. When forecasters use the word Godzilla, this is the buried memory underneath it. The strongest events on record are also the ones tied to the largest human tolls, and that is not a coincidence. That is cause and effect, separated sometimes by only a few months. The damage from a super El Niño is not only about people. It is also about entire ecosystems crossing thresholds that cannot come back from quickly. Look at what happened during the El Niño of 1997 and 1998. As the ocean heat spread, it triggered the first global coral bleaching event ever recorded. When water gets too warm for too long, coral expels the algae living inside it, turns ghostly white, and if the heat does not relent, it dies. During that single event, an estimated 16% of the world's coral reefs died. 16% of the reefs on the entire planet gone in connection with one warm phase of the Pacific. Then it happened again. During the Godzilla event of 2015 and 2016, The third global bleaching event struck, and the Great Barrier Reef took catastrophic damage, losing large fractions of its northern coral. These are not abstract losses. Reefs are the nurseries of the ocean, the places where a huge share of marine life begins. When they collapse, fisheries that feed hundreds of millions of people start to wobble. And coastal economies built on those fisheries and on reef tourism feel it directly. The thread back to the main story is direct. The same ocean warming that is climbing on the index right now is the exact force that bleached those reefs, and a very strong event puts them back in the crosshairs. What makes this round different is, again, the elevated baseline. The reefs that survived the last bleaching events are now starting from warmer water than they did before. So a comparable El Niño anomaly arriving today lands on coral that already has less margin. The ocean does not reset between events. It carries the heat forward, and each strong El Niño tests systems that are already closer to their breaking point than they were the time before. There is a pattern in the temperature record that ties all of this together, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The hottest years on record have a habit of lining up with strong El Niño events. The event of 2015 and 2016 helped push 2016 to the hottest year ever recorded at the time. Then it happened again in the most recent cycle. The El Niño of 2023 and 2024 contributed to record global heat, and 2024 was widely reported as the first calendar year to average roughly 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. That 1.5 figure is not random. It is the number the world has spent years trying not to cross. The mechanism is the one we have been building toward this whole time. El Niño takes heat that has been stored in the ocean and releases it into the atmosphere. So global air temperatures spike during and just after a strong event. When that release stacks on top of the long-term warming trend, you get records. And because this current event is forming on the warmest baseline in the instrumental record, the concern among scientists is straightforward. A super El Niño layered on top of where we already are could push 2026 or 2027 to a new global temperature record, the same way the previous strong events pushed their own years to the top of the list. This is the part of the story that makes the Pacific signal everyone's business. A record hot year is not just a statistic on a chart. It means more intense heat waves, more evaporative stress on crops and water supplies, and heavier downpours when the rain does come, because warmer air holds more moisture, roughly 7% more for every degree Celsius of warming. That single physical rule is why a hotter El Niño intensifies both ends of the spectrum at once. Deeper droughts in the places that dry out, and worse, flooding in the places that get hit. The ocean signal forming right now is the switch that turns that dial up. Let me connect the abstract number to the thing that actually reaches your life, which is food. The pathway from a warm Pacific to an empty shelf runs through agriculture, and El Niño hits farming on multiple fronts at the same time. In some regions, the rerouted rain belts mean the monsoon weakens or arrives late, and staple crops fail in the heat. In others, the opposite happens, and fields drown under flooding that rots the harvest. Either way, the food that was supposed to grow does not, and that is how a temperature reading in the ocean becomes a price spike at the market, and in the worst cases, a genuine shortage. The economic effects are heavily lopsided, which is part of why El Niño is so hard to talk about in simple terms. Research on the economics of these events has found that a strong El Niño can actually produce a small economic gain for some countries, including parts of North America, partly through milder winters and certain agricultural effects. But for other countries, India, Australia, parts of Southern Africa and South America, the same event imposes real economic losses through drought, flood, and crop damage. So there is no single global verdict. There are winners and losers, decided by where you happen to sit relative to those rerouted rain belts. And historically, the losers tend to be the regions least able to absorb the blow. There is a second front that hits even faster than the farms, and that is the fishery off the coast of South America. Remember that in a normal year, cold water rises from far below the surface along that coastline, and that cold water is packed with nutrients that feed enormous schools of fish, especially anchovies. When El Niño arrives and warm water spreads east, it caps off that nutrient-loaded upwelling. The cold water can no longer reach the surface, the food chain at the bottom collapses, and the fish either die or move away. During the strongest past events, the anchovy fishery off Peru, one of the largest single fisheries on the planet, has crashed hard, and that crash ripples through global markets for fish meal, animal feed, and food prices far from South America. It is one more way that a temperature change in the ocean turns directly into a supply problem on land. This is the modern version of the 1870s pathway, just with more safety nets in place. We have global grain markets, emergency food programs, and forecasting that can see the event coming months in advance, which is exactly what is happening right now. That early warning is the one genuine advantage we have over every previous generation that faced an event like this. The ocean is telling us, in advance, that stress is coming to the global food system. Whether that warning turns into preparation or gets ignored is the part that is still unwritten. Whenever a story like this circulates, a few claims always come with it, and they deserve a straight answer rather than a dismissal. The first is the idea that something like this must be engineered, that secret technology, weather modification, or facilities like the one people call HARP are somehow steering the Pacific. The problem with that claim is energy. El Niño is a redistribution of heat across the upper layers of the largest ocean on Earth, an amount of energy that dwarfs anything human technology can produce by an almost unimaginable margin. Cloud seeding can nudge an individual storm. A facility that heats a small patch of the upper atmosphere cannot create, move, or sustain a warm pool spanning thousands of miles of ocean. The machine that drives this is the Bjerknes feedback we walked through earlier, and it runs entirely on its own. The second claim is the opposite, that El Niño is fake, just normal variability being hyped for attention. And here the skeptics get one thing right. El Niño is completely natural. It is an oscillation that has been swinging back and forth for thousands of years, long before any factory or power plant existed. But natural has never meant harmless. The 1878 famine was natural. The coral die-offs were natural. The record-hot years were driven in part by a natural cycle. The fact that something is a normal part of the climate system does not mean its strongest expressions are gentle. It means they are recurring, and the record shows they have repeatedly been deadly. There is also a clean reason to set aside the idea that the sun is behind this particular warm-up. As of yesterday, our local star is quiet. The geomagnetic activity index is sitting at, or below 2, well under storm level, with no Earth-directed eruptions and only a minor flare on the books. Solar activity does influence climate over very long timescales, but this event is not a solar trigger. It is Earth's own ocean and atmosphere doing what they have always done, and the quiet sun overhead this week makes that about as clear as it gets. So where does this leave us, and what should you actually keep an eye on? The single most important thing to watch over the next few months is the magnitude. Whether this event tops out as a moderate El Niño or climbs into that very strong plus 2.0 and beyond range. That number decides which version of history this rhymes with. A moderate event brings real but bounded consequences. A genuine Godzilla brings the company of 1997, 2015, and at the far extreme, the shadow of 1877. We will not know for certain for several more months, because the ocean has not finished loading and the spring into summer forecasts still carry their usual uncertainty. The arc of this thing is not a single season. Strong El Niño events typically peak in the northern hemisphere winter, around the turn of the year, and then decay through the following spring, often flipping into a La Niña afterward. So the window of consequences runs from the back half of this year, through a peak around the coming winter, and into 2027, with agricultural and economic ripples potentially reaching into 2028. This is a multi-year story whose opening chapter is being written in the ocean right now. The decisions that matter, how food systems prepare, how water managers plan, how vulnerable regions brace, are the ones made in the months before the peak, not after it. What makes this moment genuinely worth your attention is the timing. The signal that determines whether the next 3 years are merely warm or genuinely dangerous is forming in real time, today, in a stretch of water most people will never see. By the time the answer is certain, the event will already be here. That is the nature of El Niño. It announces itself in advance in numbers like plus 0.48, and then it delivers months later. The Pacific has shown its hand. The receipts from history are on the table, and now the only thing left to learn is which number this one decides to become. Keep watching the index because that is the figure that tells you how the next chapter ends.